We're going to cross over after this quick break into the Indy 500 very quickly. Our very own Bobby Chaffardini will react to the thrilling Indianapolis 500 with our very own Aaron McAtee, and we'll have you covered after that, after this.
Joseph Newgarden is a two-time Indy 500 winner. Oh my goodness! Let's go!
16 drivers led a lap in this year's Indianapolis 500, but only one would cross the yard of bricks first. And for Joseph Newgarden, it's deja vu all over again. Newgarden became the sixth driver to earn back-to-back victories in the Indy 500 and the first since Helio Castroneves 22 years ago. Newgarden brought his victory lap in the greatest spectacle in racing to New York City, where he rang the opening bell at the NASDAQ, took celebration photos atop the Empire State Building, and threw out the first pitch at the Mets game Wednesday night. Not a bad way to commemorate his second straight last lap pass, only the fourth time in history the 500 has been decided by a last lap pass. Indy in 60.
Welcome back here on the show. I'm Bobby C., joined now by Aaron McAtee, the voice of the Racer to Racer podcast presented by Race 92. Aaron, how's it going? How are you?
It's good. And I think we need to say I'm one of the voices of the Racer to Racer podcast presented by Race 92. My other co-host is Scott Bowie. And someone else who also joins us a lot is third generation racer Jagger Jones, Indy Next driver, and he's also doing some IMSA races this year.
Well, you do a great job, and it's so great to have you here on the show because I wanted to catch up with you and talk a little bit about this fantastic Indianapolis 500 finish. Only the fourth time in history that we have a last lap finish, and it actually comes in back-to-back years and a back-to-back winner for the first time in quite some time, since Helio Castroneves, in fact, in 2000, 2001. What did you think of Joseph Newgarden winning the Indianapolis 500?
I mean, no surprise, right? I mean, he's been competitive the past couple years. I've said for the past few years before he won last year that, he was due. Everyone always said, like, Joseph Newgarden is due to win the 500. And he's definitely making up now for all those years that he didn't win, and he probably should have. So, number two now. And I wouldn't be surprised if he goes for three next year.
Yeah, I mean, I thought this year might be tougher for him because of everything that has gone down with the push to pass scandal and the fact
Absolutely.
that, strategist, engineer, Tim Cindric not being around for Penske for the 500. I mean, that's a very big blow, I would say, not only to Joseph Newgarden, but also the other drivers on the front row and Scott McLaughlin and Will Power. But it seemed to have no effect on Joseph Newgarden, especially late in this race.
No, not at all. When you look at, the champions of the sport, the best drivers in the sport, you look at Joseph Newgarden, you look at Alex Palou, and Palou's in a similar situation where he has, a big lawsuit hanging over his head, and it doesn't affect him either. So I think when you look at the champions of the sport, like the Joseph Newgardens, Alex Palou, not much fazed them. And I think, Newgarden definitely proved that by winning the 500.
Was so
An
cool.
amazing pass.
Yeah, so cool to hear Joseph break down that pass. And I know you and I share clips a lot of times from social media, and the Pat McAfee clip of Joseph Newgarden basically saying it's very similar to Tom Brady getting the ball back on a final drive. Pato O'Ward basically lost this on the final two turns. He goes past Joseph Newgarden, and those last two corners, Joseph Newgarden makes the pass to win the Indianapolis 500.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it was really interesting how Newgarden broke that down. I sent you the clip from the Pat McAfee show. And basically, he said the ball was in his court at that point. So it's almost like you're almost better off not leading the 500 when you're looking at the last lap. Because it seems like a lot of people, make moves, and, they've made some changes in the rules. I know and I was interested on how it would turn out with the not passing the white line. Going into the pits, right, on the front stretch, and they didn't do any of that this year, so it was good to see them following the rules. But yeah, no, it was definitely a great finish, and yeah, I mean, I was definitely rooting for Pato, I'm not gonna lie, but I mean, Newgarden definitely earned it. I mean, that was a heck of a pass.
Crushing loss for Pato O'Ward, and I know for me, I had picked Alexander Rossi to win the race.
Yeah.
and he comes in fourth. And on those last laps, I mean, it pretty much was a dash to the finish between Joseph Pato and Alexander Rossi. And Rossi, of course, finishing fourth in this race. But Pato Award, another time where he finishes second in the Indy 500. He's so young. Will it be his time soon? I mean, he's just been so good at IMS, but not good enough to win the race.
Absolutely. And when I think of Pato Award, honestly, I think of someone like Allenser Jr. If you think about Allenser Jr. in 1989, everyone's familiar with the Emerson Fittipaldi pass, him hitting the wall. Just the deal last year with Pato hitting the wall, it made me think a lot of the Allenser Jr. deal. And, Allenser Jr. obviously ended up okay, winning 2 500s. And I'm a strong believer that Pato will win the 500.
Joined now by Aaron McAtee. I'm Bobby C. We're here on the show talking Indianapolis 500. Aaron, one of the voices of the Racer to Racer podcast presented by Race 92. And for me, I think there is no race like the Indianapolis 500. There's actually no words that really can describe just how incredible this event is. And it's not just about the race. As someone that literally lives just steps away from the cathedral that is the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, what does it mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, I've grown around it really my whole life, but it's about tradition, right? I mean, when you think about tradition, there's so many things involved in tradition. There's family, everyone around here has some story with their family, like my grandfather was a yellow shirt at the track. And it just goes back, like everyone's got some kind of family history. And I know a lot of people who live in my area. And if you go back to the 40s, 50s, 60s, it was very common when racers' families were in town, they stayed with, random people. I don't know how those arrangements happen, but you hear a lot of stories about racers staying with families in the area. And obviously that's a little different now. But, it's just all about just the atmosphere. There's just no way to describe the feeling on, the night before the race. Just the whole neighborhood is just alive. You know, the whole night, and you hear helicopters. It's just a big party, and it's just yeah, it's definitely something. I know a lot of people, like when I met my girlfriend, she knew absolutely nothing about the Indy 500. I remember her telling me she wanted to go on a trip Memorial Day weekend, and I was like, yeah, I don't think that's gonna work. Um, and she goes to the 500 every year, and she absolutely loves it. She knew nothing about racing when I met her, obviously, and a lot of people are like that. Like if you just think, if you don't know anything about racing and you have no desire to go, just give it one try, and I promise you'll want to go back.
I've always said it's a bucket list event, and as someone
Yeah.
that's had the privilege and the honor of having media credentials for some of the biggest events in sports, there really is, it just, everything else pales in comparison to the Indianapolis 500. And I kid you not when I say the World Series, the Super Bowl, the Stanley Cup playoffs, Stanley Cup final, NBA final, it does not compare to 350,000 people at IMS, and just the size of that structure, the amount of people in one place, the largest one-day sporting event. You add in the racing, you add in the pageantry, as you said, Memorial Day weekend. I mean, the flyover, everything that just kind of goes into the pre-race festivities. But then for me, it's the speed. I mean, someone that's in love with cars my entire life and all these legendary drivers. I've had other people ask me, again, I love Formula One and I happen to watch other motorsports like NASCAR. And to me, there's just nothing on those calendars even that can compare to the Indy 500. Monaco, of course, the same day as the Indianapolis 500. That's a famous race. It's just not, I've never been to that race, but from watching it on television, I don't think it's anything like the Indy 500. I'm not trying to knock Monaco or Formula One. I just think as someone that has had an opportunity to be around motorsports, nothing compares to the Indianapolis 500.
Yeah, I mean, you talk really about the big three, right? Monaco, Le Mans, and the Indy 500. I've talked to drivers who've driven in both Le Mans and the Indy 500, and a lot of them will say it's similar. I mean, the Le Mans over in France is just as big deal as the 500 is here, but obviously it's just a whole, it's just different. Different types of racing. It's really basketball versus football, in my opinion. But Le Mans and Le Mans coming up here in a couple weeks. And that's one race I would love to go to.
Me too. For me, I thought it was special to see some of the, we'll say, interesting in the prognostication of this race, right? You have the anniversary of the All Penske front row, Rick Mears, Yellow Submarine, and Scott
Yeah.
McLaughlin pretty much replicating that entire look. He wins the pole. And we don't get the Penske driver in that same situation that ends up winning it like Rick Mears, but we do end up getting a Penske victory. They've been so dominant, but it has been a challenging year for them with all of the scandal that's gone on. And again, just to kind of fill the fans in here at home that are listening or watching, early in the season, first race of the season at St. Pete, Joseph Newgarden wins, but there's some controversy about the push to pass and basically some extra boost that the team had gotten. And now, a few races later, scandal basically opens up, and that race win is stricken away from Joseph Newgarden's record, and actually it goes to Pato O'Ward. Pretty interesting there, and many times actually over the course of the last few years, there has been a lot of Newgarden Pato O'Ward 1-2 finishes, but Joseph Newgarden, I would say, Aaron, maybe at first didn't do too well recovering from that, but looks like he's settling right back into his dominant form.
Yeah, like I said, I mean, it's going to affect you. I mean, but it didn't affect him very long, right? Like affect him basically one race and he's back. He's back to his form. And there's just some people that, it's funny, right? Because if you look last year, the people that were up front, minus Ericsson, obviously Ericsson was taken out in the first lap, so I guess that's kind of an exception. But Pato and Newgarden were kind of battling for it, and it's funny how every year you see kind of start seeing the same people. Dixon's always up there, Elio's always up there, and it just goes back to, first off, the Speedway chooses a winner, and that's something we actually said a couple times this weekend. But also, there's people that just understand the line around the Speedway. And they're always, I mean, as long as they have a halfway decent car, they're always going to be competitive there. I mean, that's just the bottom line. And, Dixon's one of those people, even though he's only won it once. Obviously, Newgarden, and Ericsson has seemed to, kind of found that line.
Largest purse in Indianapolis 500 history, and some pretty good numbers in terms of ratings. It was an interesting weekend for weather, and that delayed the race a little bit more than 4 hours, but it seemed to not have an impact on those that tuned in. And back home in Indiana, we actually saw the race was lit. The blackout was listed, right? Lifted, I
Yeah.
should say, excuse me, for people getting a chance to watch it because of the delay. But how much of that you think was the Kyle Larson effect? Of course, him running the double or trying to run the double.
I think a lot of it was, right? But I thought it was interesting. I know it seemed like last week when they were talking, they acted like NASCAR was going to take priority. So I'm not real sure, kind of curious on what actually changed. I mean, I think one way they put it was just how much money they put into the IndyCar deal, obviously. So it'll be interesting to see how that turns out with the waivers, as far as him still being eligible for the NASCAR championship, the playoffs. But yeah, I mean, obviously, I saw a lot of Kyle Larson shirts at the Speedway during the whole month. He had by far, I mean, you were the autograph session on Saturday. He had by far the longest line. I mean, it's great for the sport, right? And it would have been better if he would have been able to actually carry out the double. But hopefully next year that will happen. And it wasn't his fault. I know he was upset with the situation, but can't control the weather. I mean, it's just the bottom line.
Yeah, I mean,
Now
he
if that
expressed
was
his disappointment. So
yeah, and of course he had the speeding penalty in the pits, and I don't know. I mean, I think he definitely had a top 5 car if it wasn't for that.
Indy 500 rookie anyway,
Yeah.
after the day. But who were some of the other drivers to you that stood out from the race, besides, of course, the winner and the front row?
Well, a good friend of the Racer to Racer podcast, Stingray Rob, man, I was going crazy when he led 22 laps, actually the third most in the race. I think it was 22, give or take. But the third most in the race, and obviously he hasn't had the best couple years, and to see him, you know, pass Scott McLaughlin, I mean, the whole place erupted. Honestly, like he definitely has a lot of fans, and it was really cool to see kind of the underdog story. And he had a fast car there for a while. I remember you saying like he had the fastest car the fastest lap of the race for a while.
Early on, yeah.
So yeah, so that was really cool. Obviously Elio was moving up. Herda was moving up. I told you Herda was one of my picks, and he got caught in an incident. And ironically, when he crashed, they only damaged the front nose. Like the car was completely fine. So I think looking back, if he would have actually just stayed in the car, and they could have probably got the car started, and he may not have, really lost a lot of spots. But he did hit pretty hard, so it was probably kind of hard to tell what the damage was.
Yeah, I mean, I was impressed by Stingray. I was also impressed by
Yeah,
another, excuse me, another local product in Connor Daly, who also performed
absolutely.
very well in the Indy 500.
Yeah, they were doing, I think Connor and it was Connor and Stingray, maybe someone else, they were doing kind of a different strategy. When you're starting further back, sometimes those different strategies help. I mean, to be fair, I think Rossi kind of did a different strategy in 2016, and obviously it panned out pretty good for him. So, I think at some point, what do you have to lose, right? Like if you're starting way far back, like you're not going to win any other way. Might as well roll the dice a little bit.
Yeah, second year in a row for me that I pick a couple of guys that finish in the upper part of the race. Last year on the show, I said dark horse Santino Ferrucci would win, and he finished third. And then this year, going back to we'll say all reliable in a way, and Alexander Rossi looking for him to get his second win. And it doesn't happen very often. Obviously, Joseph Newgarden getting his second victory, and there were plenty of drivers in this race that had won the race before. Scott Dixon going for his second, Ryan Hunter-Reay going for his second. We know Elio Castro-Neves trying to break the record and go for a record-setting fifth. But even Takuma Sato was running fast in the month of May, and that was another
Absolutely.
driver that people thought might win his third. So many out there. Will Power, too, looking for his second win. But at the end of the day, I mean, Joseph Newgarden right now, I think on one of the other segments that I had here on the program, I talked about how, in my mind, the two best drivers in the series right now are Joseph Newgarden and Alex Palou. I'm not sure if one is more the face of IndyCar than the other, but I would say if you had to pick two drivers that are at the very top, the very pinnacle of the sport, it would definitely be the reigning champion and the reigning Indy 500 winner who now goes back to back.
Yeah, and I think really like I remember back in the day, like they used to call Ryan Hunter-Reay like Captain America. But if you look at someone now who, would be that Captain America of the series, I mean, it's definitely Joseph Newgarden, right? Like I think it's great to have an American driver win the Indianapolis 500. Indianapolis 500, obviously Memorial Day weekend, you know, it just screams America. It's just screams everything about Memorial Day weekend. When I think of Memorial Day weekend, obviously we think of the troops, but I also think of the Indianapolis 500, and it's just that's all kind of emerged around the speedway. So it's always great to have an American driver win, and I think that he does represent the series well, and I think he's bouncing. He's trying to bounce back from the situation that they had back in St. Pete.
This is Bobby C catching up with Aaron McAtee, talking some Indianapolis 500, the host of Racer to Racer podcast presented by Race 92. Aaron, speak a little bit about what you do. I mean, obviously, got a chance to speak briefly about the podcast and, of course, Race 92. You've got some awesome apparel. Drivers like Al Unser Jr. and Bobby Unser, Roberto Guerrero. Talk a little bit about what you're doing here in
Yeah, well,
Indiana.
first off, thank you so much for having me on the show. It's great to be on, and yeah, so the podcast started a couple years ago with my co-host Scott Bowie. It just started. Our first ever guest was Jagger Jones, and it's really cool. Like for him, for example, obviously we've interviewed a lot of different drivers. We've interviewed Mario Andretti, obviously Allenser Jr., Will Power, just so many greats, future and present of the sport. And someone like Jagger, when we interviewed him, he really didn't have a lot going on. He had just done NASCAR K&N. He kind of had a break in his career. He didn't know what he was going to be doing. It almost looked like his racing career was done in a way. And then about after we interviewed him, he got a USF 2000. He did a USF 2000 season, and then he did Indy Light season, and his career is kind of picking back up. So that's one of my favorite things with the series is seeing people, or with a podcast, is seeing people like that kind of, emerge with a podcast. And it's just, it's really cool. Just, it's definitely presents opportunities that I would not have if I didn't have the podcast. I would have never met you for first off without the podcast. And, from there, I have a t-shirt brand, like you said, called Race 92. We have a deal with Allenser Jr. We had a deal with Bobby Unser. You actually had one of the Bobby Unser shirts, and that's how I met you. You were wearing it on one of your shows. And then recently we have a deal with the Grant King Racers as well. They fielded many cars at the Indianapolis 500. And most recently they tried to make the 500, forget the exact year, 2000, 2001 at Top Gun Racing with RC Anderson. but yeah, so that's pretty much what we do. And trying to get into we do some other content as well besides just a podcast. I have the go-kart video, Fast Times Indoor Karting, Pro vs. Joe's. We did some karting while you were in town. And we get to race professional drivers, former and current. We've raced Stingray Rob, and also some, past drivers like Jimmy Kite, and it's a lot of fun. It's kind of a spin-off of like the old Top Gear episodes, where they did like the big cars, the big star, small car, and it's all about lap time. So it's a lot of fun, and like I said, I appreciate you having me on the show.
I do some fantastic content, and I know some people, of course, listening on the radio, not getting a chance to watch this as we streamed it on YouTube today. But the hat, right, that you're wearing there is part of Race 92.
No, this hat is not. This is actually just a vintage Allenser Jr. hat, but this shirt is part of Race 92.
Oh, very cool. Very cool. Yeah, I figured the turbo racing might be part of the kit as well.
Yeah, no, we do have some turbo racing merchandise, but yeah. So check out race92.com for any vintage racing merchandise.
Now, as someone that's in the business of always trying to, like, obviously improve on things, can IndyCar now carry this momentum? And if so, how can they carry this momentum into Detroit? I mean, so many people watching the Indy 500. Do you think there'll be a buzz coming into this weekend with the race coming up?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think there is. I don't know if the 500 has as much momentum from it from a repeat winner. I think Pato winning would have been great for the series, but also drama is good for the series as well, right? I mean, the push to pass deal definitely, creates drama, and I think it creates interest and probably viewership in some of the races and see what's going on with that. So in a way, it's a bad thing, but also in a way, it's a good thing, right? I know with NASCAR, about every week it seems like they're having some kind of fight. And at the end of the day, it gains traction and it helps with marketing.
Aaron, thanks for joining us here on the show. We'll see you in Indiana, back home again in Indiana.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thanks.